All right, so anyone listening is probably wondering about all this talk about tariffs, right? Canada, Mexico, and China. Well, we've got some fascinating source material to dive into today. And yeah, let's see what we can learn together.
Awesome.
So first off, everyone wants to know, like, why is President Trump even thinking about these tariffs? What's going on? Well, from what we've been reading, there's a few things going on. Uh, he wants to stop illegal immigration and drug trafficking, obviously from Mexico and Canada.
Hmm.
He's also trying to pressure China about their trade practices and all that fentanyl. Oh, and he's even trying to just use the tariffs to get concessions on other issues.
It's pretty interesting, right? All of this fits really well with President Trump's idea of what he calls transactional trade policy. He basically uses tariffs to bargain,
Mm.
and not just for economic reasons,
Mhm.
He's trying to get all sorts of things done.
Now, this whole thing with Colombia back in 2024 is super interesting. Can you walk us through that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So back then, President Trump told Colombia that they would get hit with a 25% tariff if they didn't start taking back unauthorized immigrants. They ended up backing down, and the tariffs never happened.
Huh. So is that kind of what we're looking at here with Canada and Mexico? Is he just trying to scare them into doing what he wants?
It's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it would make sense with the whole transactional trade policy thing. But a lot of people don't think tariffs actually work for things like immigration or drugs.
Yeah. I mean, haven't economists been saying that tariffs are way too broad of a tool for that sort of thing?
Totally take drug trafficking. Economist Sarah Bellum at the Cato Institute says tariffs mostly affect the legal stuff. And they don't really do anything to stop criminals. In fact, they might even make it worse, you know, like pushing criminals to find new, more dangerous ways to move drugs.
That makes a lot of sense. So if not tariffs, then what? What else can we do about these problems?
Well, for immigration, people are talking about stronger border security with, better tech and more people. And we could try to fix the reasons people want to leave Central America in the first place, like with economic development.
Hmm.
For the drug problem, we should be helping people who are addicted. And of course, we got to go after the criminal networks where it all starts.
Right. So maybe tariffs aren't the best way to fix these things. But putting that aside for a second, what kind of tariffs are we talking about here anyway?
Well, nobody knows for sure yet. It might not be some huge cross-the-board tariff. We might see tariffs on specific products or industries instead. For example, with Canada and Mexico, they might focus on certain agricultural products or manufactured goods.
Okay, so how fast could this all happen? You mentioned this thing called the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act.
Ah, yeah, that's a big one. It's from way back during the Cold War.
Yeah.
Basically, it lets the president put tariffs on things when
Yeah.
there's a national emergency. They made it for like wars or economic crises. But the wording is pretty broad, so presidents have used it for all kinds of trade stuff over the years. So yeah, President Trump could probably do this pretty quickly, even without Congress.
Wow, that's a lot of power.
Yeah, this is a big deal, and everyone's watching to see what happens next. This isn't just about trade and the economy anymore. There's way more to it than that.
It really is a big deal. And one of the biggest worries is what Canada and Mexico might do. They're not just going to sit there and take it, right?
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah.
I mean, if the U.S. actually does this with the tariffs, Canada and Mexico are almost definitely going to retaliate.
Okay, so what would that look like? What are they going to target?
Well, for Canada, most analysts think they'd just put tariffs on a bunch of U.S. imports, like a mirror image, you know?
Ha, tit for tat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that would affect a ton of stuff.
Things could get out of control fast. What about Mexico? Would they do the same thing?
Mexico might be a little more strategic about it. They could focus on things like food and agricultural products from the U.S. See, a lot of the stuff Mexico buys from the U.S. is just going to end up back in the U.S. anyway. So if they hit agriculture, it hurts specific industries in the U.S., but it doesn't mess up their own exports too much.
That's actually really clever. So it's not just about hurting the other guy as much as you can. It's about thinking ahead and protecting yourself, too.
Yep, and that's why trade wars are so tricky.
Once countries start throwing tariffs at each other, nobody knows what's going to happen, and it usually ends up bad for everyone. Okay, so let's say this does turn into a trade war. What does that mean for normal people like us?
Well, one of the first things you'll notice is that prices go up.
Ah, yeah, I was afraid you were going to say that. Feels like everything is more expensive now anyway. But seriously, how much worse could it get if these tariffs happen?
Hard to say for sure. But capital economics, they're pretty good. They said if there's a 10% tariff on everything, inflation could go up by 3 or 4%.
Oof, guess I'm keeping my old phone then. But what does that kind of inflation do to the economy as a whole?
Well, it puts a lot of pressure on the Federal Reserve to do something. Remember, their main job is to control inflation. So if these tariffs make prices go way up, the Fed might have to raise interest rates to try to cool things down.
Right, makes sense. But don't interest rates affect everything else too?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like businesses can't borrow money as easily so they don't grow as fast. And it's harder for people to get loans for houses and cars.
It's like a chain reaction.
So these tariffs could end up affecting everything. Prices, jobs, the whole economy. It's a mess.
It really shows how connected everything is.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot. Maybe we should sum things up for our listeners. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page. President Trump is thinking about tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China, right?
Right.
And he says it's to stop illegal immigration and drug trafficking and fix trade problems.
Yeah. But like we were saying before, a lot of experts think tariffs aren't going to solve those problems. And they might even make things worse, like with retaliation in trade wars.
Which would mean higher prices for everyone.
Exactly.
And we talked about how this is all part of President Trump's transactional trade policy.
Mhm.
He uses tariffs as a way to get other things he wants.
Which can work sometimes,
Yeah?
but it also makes things really unpredictable for businesses and the global economy.
So what does this all mean for our listeners? Basically, everything could get more expensive from your groceries to electronics.
And the whole economy could be affected.
With jobs and everything else.
It's important to remember that this stuff impacts real people, not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Yeah, this is serious stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about, so keep learning about this stuff, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
So here's a question for everyone listening. Knowing what you know now about tariffs and all the problems they could cause, how do you think the U.S. should deal with Canada, Mexico, and China on trade?
Should we be aggressive and go it alone? Or should we try to work together and find solutions that benefit everyone?
There's no easy answer, but it's a question we all need to be thinking about.
Especially with all this trade tension going on.
So keep learning, stay curious, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.